Hi everybody. I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about some of the work I've been doing on monazite and xenotime and its metamorphic evolution over protracted time. So first of all, as part of my PhD, I've been looking at some of the petrochronology of rare earth element phosphates, in which I've been trying to link the pressure and temperature and the chemistry with absolute time through metamorphic processes. And I've been supremely working on monazite and xenotime, monazite being a rare earth element phosphate and yttrium being a yttrium phosphate. Both of these are uranium-lead geochronometers, and both of them are very high in rare earth elements, meaning that we can link these geochronometers to major mineral phases within the rocks that they are hosted in. One important problem with these minerals is that they form and dissolve over continuous and discontinuous reactions, which are prevalent in protracted metamorphic systems. Now, this is quite important because the current narrative with metamorphic evolution is that it is more continuous rather than it being more an event-style process. So, as a consequence, we lose a lot of the vital information that these minerals can hold during the protracted evolution. So it brings us more to a problem is that, especially with monazite, it is capable of recording large spreads in history, such as we have a case study here from Bhutan in the Himalayas, in which these 8 samples record a history ranging from 32 to 50 million years. And what's more interesting is that these 8 samples were taken over a 10 to 15 meter outcrop location. And as we can see from this, each of the samples taken over this were also record different parts of the orogenic progression. Leading to the question, why, well, what is actually being recorded within these minerals at those specific times, and why in each of these samples are the minerals recording different things? And essentially half my PhD is to work out why. So just have a look at a bit of the petrology of this. So the 8 samples are virtually identical in thin section. The main constituents being these are metamorphic rocks out of gneissic metamorphic progression, and the matrix of these are quartz and plagioclase feldspar with lenses of muscovite and biotite. The main porphyroblast phases include variability in the garnet abundance and the presence or absence of staurolite and kyanite minerals. We also see other accessory minerals such as apatite, rutile, and zircon through these rocks. However, there is quite an abundance of both monazite and xenotime within all 8 samples. So before we started with the data collection, I wanted to have a bit of a look about the mineral chemistries themselves. In the case of monazite, 2 groups emerged. One pertaining to these samples that contained yttrium poor cores in the xenotime, with this yttrium-rich rim present around the outside of the grain, and group 2 containing just yttrium-rich grains with no distinction between pore or rim. And in terms of the xenotimes, there were no elemental zoning in them whatsoever. And these maps were done through EDS mapping through SEM. So the data collection itself was done through split stream geochronology, which is a little bit different from the conventional style, where we were able to gather age and chemistry from the same ablated material, which was really, really cool to work with. Essentially, we were using the same laser, and we were splitting the ablated material into 2 separate mass spectrometers, one that collected the age information on the atom, and another mass spectrometer that collected the trace elements. And over the 8 samples, we were able to collect over 500 data points, which was quite a substantial amount given the amount of material that we had to work with. So the current initial results, so these are from group 1 monazites, in which they have these yttrium poor cores forming the abundance at roughly 35, leading almost up to 37 million years, and the yttrium-rich rims going all the way down to an abundance in about 24 to 22 million years. But overall, that we recorded a massive spread in ages, spanning quite a large period of the geological time. Also, exhibiting quite a large continuous crystallization from these samples in group 1. If we then move on to some of the group 2 samples, one of the samples was a little bit odd because, well, sample C, later called group 1.5, contains no yttrium poor cores, however, still records ages up to 30 million years, and alongside a spread in ages that was very similar to that seen in group 1. If we compare this group, or compare sample C to the other samples in the same group, you see that there's a stark difference with the rest of these group 2 monazites clustering around 24 to 22 million years, with a little bit of a tail going down to about 14 million years. If we look at the whole data set as a whole, we can see that there are 2 main crystallization pulses of monazite, linking back to the 2 groups that we were seeing in the EDS maps, one going from 37 to 15, and group 2 going from 24 to 14 million years. And group 1.5 having the same textures seen in group 1, however, and the same age, however, as we'll see a little bit later, the chemistry was closer to that of group 2. If we then superimpose the xenotime data that we got out of the same samples, we can see that there is the same kinds of groups appearing. So there's 2 separate groups. The monazites from the xenotimes from the same samples as group 2 monazites crystallizing in the gap between the group 1 and group 2 samples, and the xenotimes from the group 1 monazites crystallizing at the end of group 2. If we have a quick look at the chemistry of all of these rocks, we can see that the dysprosium-ytterbium ratios decrease with age strictly, with the concentrations in group 2 following that the same as the oldest concentrations in group 1, and group C with the lowest overall concentrations relatively compared to the rest of the samples. In terms of yttrium, we have a steady increase in yttrium with age. Can I move that? Oh, I can. Fantastic. That would have been helpful. We see that the concentrations in group 2 were the same as the youngest concentrations in group 1. So both of these being almost the opposite of each other. If we then look at other elements such as cerium, we can see that overall with group 1 this decreases with age mostly, but in group 2 there is no real difference in concentration of cerium. Whereas in the europium anomaly concentrations overall there is no real change. However, if you separate this sample per sample, we can see that the anomaly increases with age, though it's not necessarily as visible in these graphs, which possibly points to the production of feldspars and the degradation of garnets at the same time that monazite is growing. But what the chemistry really illustrates is the fact that group 1 and sample C, as well as group 2, all have different chemical signatures, which are separable in the plots that I've just shown you. If we were to look at all of this together, we can see that the older ages, well, if I'm trying to link chemistry and age, the older ages I've been able to linked to a lower garnet abundance within the rocks and a higher rare earth element concentrations, meaning that we'd have an excess of yttrium and rare earths available in the rock to form monazite earlier on. And as metamorphism progresses and we get the start of garnet degradation, we then get a steady influx of yttrium and rare earth elements still available to then continuously crystallize monazite over time. The main difference in this is that with group C, we also have a lower garnet abundance. However, they're overall a lot lower in concentration in rare earth elements, meaning that the concentrations would have to be high enough in rare earth elements to be able to then start crystallizing monazite, which is why it's a lot later than those seen in group 1. And the rest of group 2, I put a lot later crystallization, not only down to this almost metamorphic kind of more of a pulse, about 24 to 22, which is indicated by the yellow line. And I've put this down to an influx of yttrium and rare earth elements coming from the degradation of apatite and garnet at the same time, which has led to the creation of these yttrium-rich rims and this higher crystallization factor in the group 2 monazites. When we look at the xenotines in correlation to the monazites, we see that there are 2 different stages, depending on the group that they're associated with. Group 1, I have put down to there being group 1, I've put down to there being a less availability of yttrium because it's all tied up in the monazites at this point, and it doesn't reach a saturation potential until a lot later after the more significant metamorphic pulse at 24. Whereas in group 2, we see that overall we have a higher yttrium content and higher rare earth elements, meaning that we can crystallize both monazite and xenotime at the same time at an earlier age. So just to summarize, monazites that from this sample that were exposed yield a very large spectrum of ages spanning 24 million years, where the 2 groups split into an older and younger group, depending on the presence or absence of these core yttrium core cores or yttrium-rich rims. And xenotime crystallizes both after monazite and before monazite, depending on the relative concentrations of yttrium and garnet abundance in the individual samples themselves. And yeah, my next steps, as this is still relatively young, is to correlate these monazite groups to the bulk compositions and the other mineral abundances, and then hopefully model the pressure temperature progression with absolute time. Yeah, thank you. I'll accept any questions you have.
Yes. If you had to have a guess, would you be able to sort of estimate what you think in terms of the metamorphic history is driving this pulse? Is it major breakdown of a major mineral like prograde breakdown of chloride or something that's releasing a lot of fluid?
Well, this is the thing. In these rocks, there's actually little evidence for fluid interactions, which is probably why we're seeing this higher frequency of recorded older ages. So it hasn't had time to dissolve these older cores, which is why I've got this preservation. But I think this pulse at about 24, 22 is more down to the decompression things that we're seeing in the Himalayas that are roughly around that time in this area. So I think it's due to that metamorphism that we're seeing there. Yeah.
I'm interested. Did you see any evidence for lead diffusion in your apatite?
Apatite, we haven't done a lot of work on the apatites. We've mainly xenotines on the monazites and the xenotimes because honestly we haven't had time. We collected so much data from the monazite and xenotime just to figure out what was causing this spread that the apatites were not a priority at that time. However, it would be really interesting to see that in further research. I was tempted to, but at the moment, considering I'm quite close to the end of my PhD, it probably wouldn't be plausible to collect data from it. But it would be really interesting to see at a later point, sure.
Got a question on chat.
did you observe any textual evidence or relative timing information, such as inclusions in porphyroblasts, coronas, and resorbed garnets? So yeah, the garnets are heavily resorbed, and I do see some evidence of some either fluid or melt inclusions. However, that in terms of inclusions of accessory minerals, in the previous study there were maybe up to maybe 10 grains of monazite found in them, but in my samples I didn't see any, so I wasn't able to have a look at the inclusions. There were inclusions in staurolite and in kyanite as well, and that is something I'm still looking into. But yeah, I have a feeling that they will tie in exactly where they are supposed to be in the metamorphism of the rocks as well. So.
Thanks. You may have mentioned this, but what was the range of monazite in a single sample?
The largest was sample F, where it ranged from 37 million years all the way down to, I think the lowest was 14 in that sample. It was a massive spread of ages. But what was really interesting was it was all continuous crystallization that I put it down to at the moment. There wasn't any breaks in that sample. In other samples, you do see very small breaks. And even down on a grain per grain sample, grain per grain basis, you do see breaks. However, overall, they all present this overall protracted crystallization.
Is there any evidence for allanite in any of these samples?
Allanite, no, we haven't seen any allanite in these rocks. No, we originally did think that there was allanite, but they turned out to be tourmalines. So no.
Is it a quick one?
Yeah, you have monazite presented in the same sample.
Yes.
Is there anything extra to be gained from the rare earth partitioning between the two?
I'm still interrogating the data at the moment. At the moment, my current plans are to look at the data further using lambda coefficients as well, to see if I can look at mid rare earths versus heavy rare earths. The one major difference that I was seeing was in the group 2 monazites, which were the younger group. There was a correlation between there was higher correlation in the mid rare earths, which I think I'm putting down more to maybe the degradation of zircon and apatite in these rocks as well. So yeah, there was a subtle difference, but I'm still interrogating the data, so